Everybody's awake? Okay. This is probably the most important topic about marriage. You know why? Because without intimacy, I think we may need to dim the light a little bit if possible, you know. Just turn off one of these lights here so they can... without intimacy, there is no marriage, period. I can say, like, I'm going to get married and stay celibate or virgin. No. It's not allowed. Because this is God's plan. This is God's purpose. To become one flesh. Since the beginning, since the creation, He created us, male and female, and He said, we shall become one flesh through marital intimacy. And that's why some marriages fail, because of the absence of intimacy, of some dysfunctional intimacy. That's why we need today to focus on this one fleshness, as I call it sometimes. Okay. Our two objectives today to understand the factors that shape up our sexual behavior in marriage. And the second, to understand how to submit such behaviors to God's purposes and plans for us as Christians. You know why as Christians? What is the difference between Christian marriage and any other marriage? Very simple. Christian marriage actually is about the union of three entities, not two. In any marriage, it's the bond connecting a man and woman, husband and wife. But when it comes to Christianity, it's different. You know, some people may ask, why should we go to church to get married? Why don't we just get the civil marriage or certificate and that's it, and we are already married? I say, because in a Christian marriage, you shall need the third party. The one who is going to join you together into one flesh. Who is that? God. What God has joined together, let not man separate. So it is going to be God who is going to join you together into this one flesh. That's why, and we say, God is the author of sexuality. He is the one who created sex for a good purpose, to become the highest and the utmost expression of love. Because you cannot express your love to anyone else ever sexually, but only to your spouse. A very unique bond that will connect you to your spouse. And this would keep the bond strong and everlasting. When you hear from Abuna, for example, how many years, Abuna, have you been married now? How many years?
Oh, I was married?
Yeah.
57 years.
57 years. I'm going to become, me and my wife, you saw my wife with me today, 49 years this year. So, what about if you ask us, are you happy? Yes, of course. Of course. Because God has been always in our marriage. And that's how we are going to describe today this God purpose, objective, which we call sexuality in marriage. We need to understand some gender difference between men and women. Okay? Let me start first with some verses. Probably heard those verses before many times. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." And then, so God created man in his image, his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Why? Because in marriage and in intimacy, we'll see the image of God. We'll see the Trinity and the unity. As we call the unity of God, three persons: God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Look into marriage. It's a man and woman, and God is joining them together into a unity. This is the image of God in marriage. Okay? By the way, in Christianity, we don't recognize something called singlehood. Any Christian should get married to something. Either a spouse, male and female and God, or get married to God himself and the church. So those who were not called into marriage, they need to look into that. If God's calling to them is to stay in marriage with God himself and in the church to serve him. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." In the Old Testament, Genesis 2:24, we say, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." In the New Testament, Jesus would add some few words to that verse. "Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." This is what we are going to talk about. No shame in sexuality. No guilt. Actually, shame and guilt came into our life because of sin. But now, after God himself was incarnated, and he took flesh like us, all of us, he is returning us back to the life of the paradise, removing shame and guilt from our sexuality when it comes to marriage. Yes, before we get married, we need to keep our sexuality pure. We need to work hard on that. However, once we get married, our sexuality has become activated because it's about loving the other, giving into the other, submitting to the other. That's how we enjoy our sexuality really, really in marriage. Were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. That was in Genesis, before the fall. Now, two questions: how to make it work and how to avoid downfalls. Let us understand our own sexuality, because there are some common myths and beliefs about sexuality. We need to examine those a little bit quickly. Negative attitudes and belief about marriage. Intimacy and sex is only to have children. Right or wrong? Wrong. You know why? Because sexuality basically is about love. Then, as a blessing of our love to each other, we'll have children. Sex brings guilt and shame. It's an act of sin. Wrong. Sex is only to satisfy my spouse. I don't have to enjoy sex myself. No, bad. Sex isn't needed after our 9th anniversary. Wrong. Sex has become so boring. Why? I mean, we need to take care of that. It's hard to communicate our sexual needs. Why? After marriage, we need to feel it's okay to talk about that. There's nothing wrong in sex. Sex is pure. Like like any other need. I think you heard just Abuna is talking about needs. If you are hungry, you will go to your wife and say, fix me something to eat. If you need some money to shop around, you go to your husband and say, I need some money to shop around, etc., etc. Why doesn't happen when we need to communicate our sexual needs? And the last one is a little funny, but I heard it myself. Too much sex in marriage makes you sick. Yeah, actually the opposite. Actually it's the opposite. After marriage, whenever you are available to each other to become one flesh, remember, you're doing something good for the marriage. You're keeping the marriage strong. You're bringing God to empower your marriage. What a blessing. That's great, of course. So, I know that we might be very busy with our lives, stressed and things like that, but there should be no excuse not to become intimate whenever we can. Now we are two different genders and two sets of different needs. For example, the wife's 5 basic needs. I start with wives. You know why? Because that's how the Bible started. It started with the wife's needs. What is the major need of a wife? Of course, you heard that before. What is that? Affection. Huh? Affection. Yeah. Affection, and affection is the gate into intimacy. That's why wives who don't feel loved, sometimes they are frigid, cold, non-responsive, because that's how God has built her mind to mobilize her sexually. A husband should become affectionate. You start to work on that, not at 9 p.m. but at 9 a.m. in the morning, when you talk to your wife all day long, how much you love her, how much you miss her, how much she's beautiful, all that stuff that of course you know very well, and you can read about that much more. Number 2 is conversation as another entrance into intimacy. A wife, if she doesn't have a chance to talk, speak, somebody is listening to her, remember, that shuts her away from becoming sexual. We need to understand each other's needs, please, my dear children. And number 3, of course, that's maybe less important, but it's very important, an honest and open husband. Yes. Number 4, a financially supportive husband. Wives suffer when they live with a mean husband, rigid-minded husband, especially with money, miser, And number 5, a committed husband. Get into the 5 basic needs for husbands now. What is number 1? What do you think? Huh? Sexual intimacy. Sexually fulfilling wife. And number 2, and that's the Bible, what the Bible, we'll see that just shortly now. An attractive wife. Visually attractive, because wives depend on their hearing, but husbands use their eyes. That's how they become motivated, stimulated. So they need an attractive wife. And then a supportive wife, a respectful or respecting and admiring wife. And the last is a recreation companionship, like a wife is a companion. Now the major challenge, affection versus sex. Is that these two things are opposing or contradictory to each other? No. Affection and sex are very intimate themselves. You know why? Because sex basically is about affection, it's about love. But that's the expression of that love. We do that physically, sexually. God's purpose of sexuality. What? Why God has created sex, basically? We just mentioned one of them. Sex as a drive or the divine expression of love. And this, you can see the verse here. The two shall become one flesh. What God has joined together, let not man separate. Some couples may not have children. Still, they enjoy their love to each other for the rest of their life. We know many of those people don't have children, but still they are happy with each other. They are sexually active. That's fine. And they use their love towards the community, society, church, etc. Sex as a relief from sexual tension. Yes, this is very important. You know why? Because temptation is all around. And when we get tempted, we need an outlet of that temptation. I don't go out and commit adultery with anybody else. But I go to my spouse and ask for sexual fulfillment or gratification. And here it says here in 1 Corinthians 7:2, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife and let each woman have her own husband. And the last purpose is about procreation. Pro means producing, creation, new creation. That's about procreation. And God blessed them, Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Okay, now we have 4 factors controlling or shaping up our sexual behaviors in marriage. Number 1, love. Sex without love has no meaning, correct? Because it's just a physical act. And number 2, physical factors. And number 3, mental and psychosocial factors. And the last one is about religious and spiritual factors. Let us talk about love a little bit. What is love? What is love? I think we are confused about the meaning of love to some extent. We don't know exactly what's meant by love. We all say that, I love you, love me, etc. No. When it comes to love, the meaning of love, let us examine that word. Because God is love. And we cannot separate the meaning of love from understanding who is God. So, love here says, love is the divine constructive energy. Think about it. Love is energy. And it's constructive. It builds up. Constructive energy and dynamic power of bonding. Isn't that God? When God creates, when God builds up our lives, this is divine energy. And to make bonding perfect, love may lead the loving one through some acts or some sorts and levels of giving, whether through surrendering, sacrificing, suffering, or even dying for the beloved one, as Christ for the church. We probably would have never understood the meaning of love until we saw it where? On the cross. That's the meaning of real love. No wonder that there is no other religion in the whole world that speaks and talks and writes about love like Christianity. Why? Because we saw already the meaning of love in the crucifixion of God Himself on the cross, the Son of God. And that's how it works in marriage, my dear brothers and sisters. In marriage, we see the dynamics of love, this motion of love all the time. It starts with the husband. It starts with the time. You remember, gentlemen, when you went to your future spouses or fiancés or whatever, and you did that, would you marry me? I love that picture. I have it on one of my slides, but it's not here probably. And I would love to remind you of that moment when you have decided to go to your beloved one or your honey or whatever you call her and say, I love you, would you marry me? And here is my ring. You know what is that? That's exactly what Christ did for the church. Because that's when Christ loved His church, His fiancée, His wife-to-be, His bride. And He said, I am surrendering to death for you. This is my ring. This is my covenant. And when the church saw that, it worshipped Him. She worshipped Him. She knelt down. Don't we do that all the time? When we go to church and see the cross of Christ, His blood, His flesh, bleeding, suffering, don't we say, I love you, Jesus? And this is exactly what should happen in your marriage. Love starts with a husband, a Christ-like husband who loves his wife, and the wife will submit to him and surrender to him. And the two live in that love all their life. Love, like other forms of energy, love is designed to energize our life in other words, love makes our life dynamic, that is, in motion. That's why marriage should start and end up with love. It's God's idea. It's about God, and it's a good idea. That's how love is highly needed in marriage. Second, talk a little bit about love and sex. Yes. Is it love or sex? Is it making love or having sex? They should be going together. No contradiction between both of them. Yes. Second factor, the physical factors. What about the physical factors? We talk about the sexual response cycle. Intimacy about a cycle called sexual response cycle that we all shall go through, males and females, gentlemen and ladies, or ladies and gentlemen, husbands and wives, from day one. It starts with something called the desire. And then it will pass through a stage called arousal, and ending up with gratification or orgasm. This cycle is about how sexuality, how God has designed us to work. It starts with desire. What about desire? It's about motivation. It's about the appetite. Can you eat when you don't have any appetite? Of course not. What would you say that? I'm not hungry. Right? I'm not hungry. And this exactly applies to our sexual life. If you are not hungry, there is something wrong with sexuality. If you are losing your appetite and motivation to make love to your spouse, then there is something wrong. If it is temporary, it's fine. But if this is the case all the time, or most of the time, then you should seek some help. What about arousal? Arousal, the arousal stage is about communicating our love or our interest in each other. In other words, when we become verbal, when we use our touches to each other, our body is becoming stimulated or aroused. It's a preparatory stage before we complete the sexual intercourse. And once we are ready with arousal, we will move into sexual intercourse. And we say sexual intercourse according to God's design. It is the vaginal intercourse. And it should be ending up with pleasure to both parties, male and female. And the pleasure is being felt all over the body. So enjoyable, so pleasurable, and it's called orgasm. Mutual gratification, both of us. If one reaches orgasm before the other, the one who reaches it first should help the other to reach orgasm after that. We have to please each other so that, you know why? Because if we end up without pleasure, sexual pleasure, orgasm, we start to feel frustrated. There is a need that's not being met. And when I don't meet my need, I feel frustrated. And frustration can take many aspects. Emotionally or psychologically or mentally, then physically, etc. So, some disorders and barriers in that physical factor, the sexual response cycle. When the desire is inhibited, it's called sexual aversion, that the person doesn't have appetite all the time. Sometimes it's like a disorder that needs help from specialists and professionals. Sexual aversion disorder. This can happen because many factors, like depression, exhaustion and fatigue all the time, exposure to early life trauma, and we're going to talk about that in the next session very soon, etc., etc. Arousal problems, yes, that's like erectile dysfunction, when the man loses his erection, cannot function sexually without erection because of some factor. Most likely it is psychological. In some cases it is organic, and they need help in such case. In the female it's dryness, and dryness can happen sometimes because of some disorders of old age or hormonal imbalance or things like that. It makes it hard to complete sexual intercourse without healthy arousal. And the last one is gratification. Remember, those in green are about the two genders. In blue, it is about the male. Dryness here should be in red. I don't know why it's not, doesn't look in red. It's about the female party. Gratification for male